There's a particular kind of quiet that has nothing to do with sound. I didn't understand that until the winter I spent 3 months living in a flat on Birdcage Walk, just close enough to the palace that I could hear the changing of the guard through my bathroom window, if the wind was right. 42 years old. Divorced once, closed a second time. I'd taken a research fellowship at King's College that I'd probably accepted for the wrong reasons. To be somewhere that wasn't Ohio, somewhere that had ceremony built into its bones. And every morning I walked past that black iron fence on my way to the tube and watched the tourists press their faces to it like children at a bakery window. I was no different at first. I'd stop. Look, take the same photographs everyone takes. The ones that never capture what it actually feels like to stand there. That changed in October. Not dramatically. Not the way stories usually go. It started with a Tuesday, which is the least dramatic day of the week, and a guard I noticed for the wrong reason entirely. His name. I found out eventually through the kind of careful, apologetic questioning that British people do better than anyone on earth, was Private Elliot Marsh. 23 years old. 6'1", which I noticed because I'm 5'9", and I notice these things the way short people do, as a small, ongoing audit of the universe's fairness. He was stationed at the far sentry box that Tuesday morning. Not the central one that tourists photograph the most, but the side one, slightly recessed, where the light hits differently in autumn, more gray than gold, more civil servant than ceremony. I wouldn't have noticed him at all except that a woman near me made a sound. Not a gasp, not a word, just a small exhale. The kind that means oh. The kind that means you've just registered something your brain hasn't finished processing yet. I looked where she was looking. The guard was standing completely still, which is not unusual. That's his job. That's the entire job. But the quality of his stillness was different from the other guards I'd watched over the previous weeks. The others held themselves like men enduring something, back teeth pressed together, eyes doing the slow micro-scan of someone counting seconds. Elliot Marsh was not enduring. He was occupied, the way a cathedral is occupied, not by people but by a specific quality of air, by accumulated weight. I stood there longer than I meant to. My coffee went cold. I started paying attention differently after that. This is embarrassing to admit because I'm an academic, and we like to believe we're already paying attention. That's the story we tell ourselves. We observe, we record, we contextualize. But I was watching the palace the way tourists watch it, as a performance, something that happens at you, and Elliot Marsh was the first indication I had that there was something else going on entirely. Something that wasn't for the tourists at all. Over the following 2 weeks, I watched 9 different guards cycle through the sentry positions. I started keeping a notebook, the spiral-bound kind, nothing precious, and I wrote down what I noticed. Posture variances. The precise angle of different guards' chins, whether their eyes tracked movement or held a fixed point, how they responded to noise, the sudden crack of a tourist camera bag hitting iron, the wail of a bus braking on them all. Most of them flinched, internally, invisibly, but I was looking for it. Elliot Marsh did not flinch. More than that. And this is the thing I kept writing down and then crossing out because it sounded unhinged. He seemed to anticipate. As if he'd heard the bus 2 seconds before it happened. As if his nervous system had already processed the noise and filed it and returned to baseline before the sound even finished occurring. I mentioned this to a colleague at King's, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Osei, who had the excellent quality of taking strange observations seriously. She looked at me over her reading glasses. You're describing hypervigilance. No, I said. Hypervigilance is anxious. This is calm, disciplined hypervigilance. Then she put her glasses down. These men aren't trained to stand still, Marcus. They're trained to process everything while appearing to stand still. There's a difference. What are they processing? She smiled like I'd finally asked the right question. Whether anything has changed, she said. In the palace. In the air around the palace. In the patterns of who arrives and who leaves, and what vehicles are using which gates, and what the staff's faces look like at 7 in the morning versus 10. They are extraordinarily well-trained readers of an institution. And the best ones, she paused, stop reading it consciously. They just know when something's off, like a barometric shift. I thought about Elliot Marsh and his occupied stillness. Like weather sense, I said. Exactly like weather sense. The first time I witnessed what Pat Osei had described, truly witnessed it, not just theorized about it, was a Thursday in late October. The morning had started normally. Pale London sky, the kind that can't commit to sun or rain, and so splits the difference into a flat, pearlescent nothing. I bought my coffee from the cart on the corner, the one run by an Albanian man named Benny who'd been in the same spot for 11 years, and who had over 4 weeks progressed from nodding at me to calling me the American professor to asking how my book was going, despite my having never mentioned a book. "Good morning," I said. "Cold today." He handed me the cup. "The palace will be busy." I paused. "How do you know?" He shrugged. "The trucks came early, before 6. Usually they come at 8. He said this with the indifference of a man who has absorbed an institution's rhythms through simple proximity over 11 years, the way dock workers know the sea. I filed it. By the time I reached my usual vantage point, not right at the fence, but on the pavement slightly west, where I could see the full width of the forecourt without having my face in someone else's armpit, there were maybe 30 tourists milling around. Normal for a weekday morning. The guard at the central position was a soldier I hadn't cataloged before. Compact build, very young-looking, possibly 19. His name I never learned. He held the position correctly by the technical manual standards I'd started to familiarize myself with from public sources: spine vertical, rifle at the precise angle, chin level. But his eyes, they were doing the counting thing. Then I found Elliot Marsh. He was at the left sentry box. He'd been rotated back in. I noticed he seemed to be on a Tuesday through Thursday pattern, though this was imprecise, and he was standing with that particular quality I'd started to look for without knowing how to name. And he was doing something different. His head had not moved. I want to be clear about that because it sounds like I'm describing a small thing, but in this context it was not a small thing. His head had not moved in the way that a man who is trying not to look at something does not move his head. There's a difference between stillness as absence of motion and stillness as active suppression of motion. His head was still because he was concentrating everything into his peripheral vision. I followed the invisible line of his attention. The far right edge of the forecourt. A side entrance. A door I'd never seen open. It was open now. Not wide. Maybe 15 centimeters. And there was someone standing in it. One of the household staff. I could tell by the dark uniform. And they were not moving. And they were looking at something above and to the left that I couldn't see from my angle. Nothing happened for 40 seconds. Then Elliot Marsh shifted his weight. Fractionally. Heel to the outside edge of his boot. His spine didn't change. His rifle didn't change. But the shift meant he was ready to move. I'd learned enough by then to read it. Then the door opened fully. And 3 men in dark coats walked briskly across the far corner of the forecourt toward one of the interior archways. And 2 minutes later, a 4th vehicle, black, official-looking, no markings, entered through a gate I'd seen used maybe twice in my weeks of watching. Elliot Marsh had felt it coming before any of it was visible. Not psychic, not magic. He'd been reading the building. I waited until the end of his rotation, which was 4 hours away, and then I did something I'm not entirely sure was appropriate, but which I have no regrets about. I waited on the pavement. He came out through a side gate. They don't parade out. The ones coming off duty, they just slip out through a side door in their off-duty clothes, which is slightly disorienting because you spent 4 hours watching someone in full ceremonial uniform, and then they emerge in a puffer jacket and jeans and look utterly ordinary, and I caught his eye and held up my hand. He stopped, assessed me, the way he assessed everything, completely without appearing to. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "My name is Marcus Holt. I'm an academic at King's College. I've been watching the guard detail for about a month, and I've been observing I don't want to say technique, that sounds clinical, your manner, how you stand, what you notice." I paused. "I'm not writing about you specifically. I'm writing about institutional behavior and embodied expertise, and I'd like to buy you a coffee if you're willing to talk to me for 20 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. He had a broad, unreadable face that I suspected was naturally expressive and had been trained out of expression over time, like a very good poker player. But around the eyes, there was something, not humor exactly, but the place where humor lived when he let it out. "How long have you been watching?" he said. His voice was flatter than I expected. West Midlands accent mild. "About 4 weeks." He considered this. "Did you write down the Thursday thing? The side door?" I stared at him. "I saw you look," he said. Mild, unbothered. "You figured it out about 30 seconds after it happened." Most people don't notice at all. We went to the Costa Coffee on Victoria Street, and he had a flat white, and I had nothing because my hands were doing the thing they do when I've just been told something that reorganizes the landscape of a project, and I needed them to be empty. He talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I'll compress it because the compression is the point. This is what he told me about compression, about the education of stillness, but I want to honor that he was thoughtful and honest and occasionally very funny in a dry way that surprised me. And I want to honor that he was 23 and had learned things that most people 3 times his age have not learned and may never learn. The first month, he said, I was counting. That's what you do at first. You count seconds, you count your breaths, you count the tourists, you pick a wall of the forecourt, and you count the bricks. Anything to make the time pass without your brain eating itself. And then, your sergeant yells at you for looking at the bricks. For looking at them? For fixating. There's a difference. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Fixation means you've stopped processing. You've narrowed down to one thing, and everything outside it disappears. That's a liability. That's how someone walks up on your left, and you don't see them until they're at the box. So what replaces counting? Listening, he said, but not with your ears. With everything. He paused, and I could tell he didn't love that he couldn't be more precise, because he was clearly a precise person. The palace makes sounds. All buildings make sounds. But the palace makes specific sounds that change depending on what's happening inside it. The HVAC cycles differently when there's more activity. The kitchen vents. You can smell lunch preparations from the south box if the wind's from the right direction, and you know the difference between a normal day's cooking and what they put on for guests. He looked at his coffee. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like a skill. It sounds like witchcraft is what it sounds like. My first sergeant, Sergeant Holloway, he did 23 years. He told me that after about 18 months, the building would start to talk to me. I thought he was having a go. He smiled brief. He wasn't. What does it say? Elliot Marsh looked out the window at the gray October street, at the buses, at the people hurrying past in the cold with their collars up. It gets heavier, he said, before something important, before an announcement or a significant arrival, or any shift in the official weight of things. The silence gets heavier. He glanced back at me. That's the only way I can put it. I know it sounds, no, I said. It doesn't, and I meant it, because I felt it too, standing on that pavement. Not as acutely as he felt it. I was outside the fence, untrained, only a month in, but I'd felt something on that Thursday morning that I hadn't been able to name. A change in atmospheric pressure that had nothing to do with weather. The building had shifted its weight, and Elliot Marsh had felt it happen. November came, and the tourists thinned out. This is something nobody tells you about London in November. That the city becomes itself again, like a theater after the audience has left, stagehands walking freely across the stage because the performance is over and now the real work begins. The mall in November smells like wet pavement and exhaust and something faintly organic, leaf rot, the park breathing out. The tourists who remain are the committed ones, the ones in proper weatherproof gear with itineraries and waterproof folders, and they regard the palace with the dutiful respect of people who have traveled far and are going to see it whether it cooperates or not. I liked November better. With the crowds thinner, I could observe without the friction of pressed bodies. I could find a spot on the pavement and stay there for 2 hours without someone's wheeled luggage, try to remove my ankles. And the guards, I noticed, were fractionally different in November, not in discipline that never changed, but in the quality of their alertness. As if the reduced foot traffic meant they were running slightly cleaner signal. Less noise to filter. Elliot Marsh and I had developed by then a loose arrangement. Not friendship exactly. Something more specific than friendship. The word I kept reaching for was apprenticeship, except that the knowledge transfer was mutual and neither of us had formally agreed to it. He'd stop on his way out some Thursday afternoons. I'd be on my pavement spot. We'd nod. Sometimes he'd walk over and stand beside me for a few minutes and say something quietly and then walk away. I wrote everything down in the spiral notebook afterward, and some of it I understood immediately, and some of it I'm still working through now. One Thursday in the first week of November, he came to stand beside me and said nothing for 3 minutes. Then, you see the difference between the two on the left? There were two guards I'd been watching. One was a soldier I'd cataloged as H7 in my notebook, tall, very fair, who had a habit of rolling his weight imperceptibly to his left heel every 45 minutes, which I'd clocked as a recurring discomfort signal. The other was new. First time I'd seen him. Younger looking than H7 by maybe 2 years. The young one's nervous, I said. New. He's been doing this 8 months. Elliot still wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the forecourt, arms at his sides, looking for all the world like a man waiting for a bus. He's nervous today, specifically. How do you is breathing? The chest moves differently when the breathing is controlled versus when it's effortful. That, he paused, is effort. I looked. The young guard's chest. I couldn't see it at this distance, but I kept looking. Why is he nervous today? Because something's happening inside. Simple. Factual. He knows it. They tell you the first time to treat every day the same standard, same discipline, same posture. Doesn't matter what's going on behind you. But you can't fully do that until you stop feeling the difference. And he still feels it. Do you still feel it? A pause. Yes, but differently. He looked at his watch. I feel it, and it settles. Like he thought about it, like when you're a child and thunderstorms scared you, and then you got old enough that they didn't scare you anymore, but you still knew they were thunderstorms. The recognition stayed. The fear changed shape. He walked away. I stood there for another 40 minutes, watching the young guard breathe. The thing about learning a language is that there's a phase in the middle, after you've learned the alphabet, after you've stopped translating word by word, but before the language runs through you automatically, where you exist in a kind of double consciousness. You understand what's being said, and simultaneously you're aware that you're understanding it, which creates a half-second lag, a shimmer of cognitive overlap that fluent speakers don't experience. That was where I was in November. I was reading The Palace in double consciousness. I'd see something shift, a vehicle route change, a pattern of staff movement, the quality of how quickly a door closed, and I know what it meant one beat after my gut had already recorded it, which meant I was right more often than I used to be, and right more slowly than Elliot Marsh, and this described the distance between us precisely. He was fluent. I was conversational. The second week of November, a Tuesday, something happened that I had no framework for. Benny was not at his cart. This shouldn't have registered. He might have been sick. He might have had a delivery. He might have been in the back of his van doing inventory in the cold because he'd been short of oat milk 3 Tuesdays in a row and was trying to prevent a fourth. Except he was always there. 11 years. His cart was on the corner like the corner was built for it, like the pavement had subsided slightly around the wheels. I'd been there 38 days, and he'd been absent 0 of them. I got my coffee from the chain on Victoria Street and walked to my spot. The forecourt was quiet. Not unusually quiet. It was early, barely 7:30, the light still thin and gray-green, the kind of light that makes London look like it exists in the past rather than the present. 2 guards on station. One was Elliot Marsh. But the forecourt. Something in it was different, and I couldn't identify the difference for 4 minutes, and then I realized the interior lights in the far wing were on. Not all of them, a specific configuration. 3 windows lit in what I now knew, from weeks of observation, was the administrative corridor, and 1 window on upper floor that I had never in 38 days seen lit before 8:15 at the earliest. It was 7:22. I wrote it down, 7:22 a.m. Far wing lights. Upper floor. Unusual configuration. Benny absent. I watched Elliot Marsh. His head was as still as ever. His body is occupied. But something, I'm aware this sounds like I'm inventing significance in retrospect, which is the historian's occupational hazard, but I swear I wrote it in the notebook before anything happened, something about the angle of his eyes behind the stillness. They were focused slightly higher than usual. He was reading the upper floors. We both were. At 7:41, a car arrived. This was not unusual. Cars arrived. This one was a dark gray estate, not official marked, which I'd learned could mean one of many things or nothing at all. Two people got out. Suits. Moving with a particular purposeful but contained stride that means, I am important, I have been trained not to show it. They went through the side gate, the one that requires a code, without being stopped, which meant their arrival had been anticipated. At 7:58, Elliot Marsh shifted his weight. Same as the Thursday in October. Same heel shift. Same minute preparation. I felt something cold move through my chest that I initially misidentified as the November air. It wasn't the November air. The building had shifted. I felt it, the atmospheric change Elliot had described, the weighted silence before I saw anything else happen. The three lit windows in the administrative corridor were now four. The upper floor window had a second one illuminated beside it. And then, at 8:15 exactly, which was significant because it was a very deliberate time, a time that says we waited until the appropriate hour, one of the senior household staff appeared at the far entrance, spoke to someone I couldn't see, and nodded. At 8:33, a formal announcement was released. I found out through my phone, through the BBC notification that appears with that specific quiet chime. That means something official, not breaking news urgent, but considered, prepared, the kind of announcement that has been drafted and reviewed and was ready to go the moment the household decided the hour was right. I won't say what the announcement was. That's not the story. The story is that Elliot Marsh felt it coming at 7:41 when there was nothing visible yet. When all there was a building breathing differently. I went to Dr. Osei's office that afternoon. She was grading papers, which she did with the focused misery of a woman who is assigned an essay question she now regrets. "Can I ask you something about institutional embodied knowledge?" I said. She put down the papers with obvious relief. "You can ask me anything that isn't about the reforms of the Long Parliament." What does it transfer? The reading of an institution, the kind of skill where you can feel the weight of silence before an official change. How does a 23-year-old end up with that? She thought about it properly. Pat Osei always thought about things properly before speaking, which is a quality I aspire to and do not have. Duration, she said, but not just duration. Proximity during significant moments. There's a reason apprentices in any skill craft learn by being present for the hard things, not by reading about the hard things. The knowledge goes in differently when your nervous system is involved. She looked at the window. The palace has had moments of extraordinary weight in the last decades. Deaths, transitions, crises of legitimacy. The soldiers who were there, who held those posts, who felt the building change around those events. They carry sensory memories of what significant institutional weight feels like. And they don't teach it directly. They can't, but they pass on the conditions. The posture, the attention, the daily practice of full body presence. She looked back at me, and the nervous systems of the men who come after them learn to recognize it. Not because they were told what to feel, because they were made to feel everything. The distinction between signal and noise comes later. First, they just feel it all. I thought about the young guard with the effortful breathing. He was in the early stage, feeling everything, filtering nothing. Elliot Marsh had learned to filter. And I, with my notebook and my cold coffees and my 38 days of civilian observation, I was somewhere between the two. A visitor, but one who had spent enough time at the fence that the fence had started to talk back. What Elliot told me, 2 Thursdays later, sitting on a bench in St. James's Park with the cold lifting off the water, the hardest thing they teach you isn't the stillness. It's not moving toward what you want to move toward. Your instinct, every time something shifts, is to check. To turn, to look directly at the thing. And you can't. You have to hold position and process it all through periphery, through your whole body. He watched a duck with the philosophical attention of a man who has learned to observe without acting. After a while, the need to turn decreases. The trust that your periphery is enough increases. That's when you start to actually feel things instead of just see them. When did it happen for you? 14 months in. No hosetaschen. He'd clearly pinpointed this. There's an early morning. Nothing significant was happening, just a Tuesday, quiet, and I was at the central box, and I realized I could feel the kitchen starting. Not smell it yet, not hear it yet. Some vibration thing, or temperature, or I genuinely don't know what it was. But I felt it, and I thought, right, okay. And after that, it was different. Different how? I stopped counting. He said it the way people say things that are also the end of a chapter. I wrote it in the notebook. He stopped counting. The building spoke. He listened that M.Y. fellowship ended on the 1st of December. I had a flight back to Ohio on the 4th. I'd arranged to vacate the birdcage walk flat on the 3rd, which gave me a few extra days after the official end of the position, and I spent most of those days in a state of mild, unacknowledged grief that I kept reframing as practical tasks. Packing, returning library books, having one last lunch with Pat Osei, who sent me off with a volume on military anthropology she'd annotated in the margins in red pen, and a handshake that was warmer than either of us had expected. I went to the palace on my last Tuesday. I went early. The sky was doing the thing it does in December in London, which is not precisely darkness, but a refusal of full light, as if the sun has agreed to show up, but reserved the right to leave early. Benny was back at his card. He'd been back for 3 weeks and had never offered any explanation for the one Tuesday he was absent, and I had not asked because some institutions communicate through silence, and Benny's card had become, over 3 months, a small institution of its own. Last day I told him. I know, he said. He handed me my coffee before I ordered it. Then he handed me a second cup. For the soldier, he said. I looked at him. He liked a flat white, Benny said. I've been doing this 11 years. I stood on my spot. The morning was cold enough that my breath came out white in the still air. These small temporary clouds that appeared and dissolved at the rhythm of my breathing. I watched them for a while. Thought about what Eliot had said about breathing, about the difference between controlled and effortful, about the chest moving in its own way when a man is genuinely still versus performing stillness. There were maybe 20 tourists at the fence. The December ones are the most different of all, bundled so completely they were almost architectural, coats and scarves and hats making them into round, muffled shapes, everyone holding their phones in gloved hands with the resigned patience of people who have been told to see this thing and are, damn it, going to see it. Eliot Marsh was at the left sentry box. I'd thought about what I wanted to say to him. I'd written drafts in the notebook, then crossed them out because they all sounded like things people say in films about what 3 months of studying something have meant to you, and I didn't want to give him a film speech, partly because he deserved better than that, and partly because he would see through it immediately with those peripheral processing eyes, and I'd feel ridiculous. So I decided to just give him the coffee and say goodbye. But then the Tuesday happened. I noticed it at 8:54. I noticed it because I'd been practicing for 3 months, and the November double consciousness had shifted into something closer to a first language. Not fluency. I wasn't going to claim fluency. I was a civilian with a notebook, not a trained soldier with 14 months of night watches and full body presence in the vocabulary, but closer than I'd been. The far wing lights again. But this time the configuration was different from the November Tuesday. More windows, a different floor, and something in the activity around the service entrance. The quiet, purposeful movement of people who have been told be ready, but not move yet. The weighted silence. I felt it before I could articulate it. A change in the air that was not temperature, not wind, not the particular dampness of December, but something institutional, something broadcast at a frequency I'd been calibrating toward for 3 months and could now receive. I looked at Eliot Marsh. He felt it first. I could tell because the heel shift, the preparation shift, the weight redistribution that happened when he'd identified a change and was ready to respond without turning had already happened. He was ahead of me by at least 2 minutes, maybe more. He was fluent. I was conversational. The gap was still there, and now I was standing at the end of my time here with it unresolved, which felt appropriate, felt honest, because this kind of knowledge doesn't close in 3 months. It doesn't close in a decade. It is a practice, not a destination. I stood very still. I tried to do what he described. Feel the whole building through the whole body, not look for one thing, but let all of it arrive. The peripheral attention, the open nervous system, the trust that what registers first in the gut is data, not imagination. The building was preparing. At 9:11, a car I'd never seen use that entrance used it. At 9:17, Elliot Marsh shifted his rifle fraction. Not enough for a tourist to notice, barely enough for me to notice, but I did notice because I'd been looking at that rifle for 3 months, and I knew its resting angle down to 3 degrees. At 9:22, the household staff member appeared at the side entrance. At 9:45, the announcement came through on my phone. Again, I won't say what the announcement was. I'll say it was significant. I'll say it was the kind of thing that, when it happens, you understand why the building had been breathing differently for an hour and a half before anyone was told. The tourists at the fence heard the notification chimes on their own phones, one by one, the way these things cascade. One person, then 3, then suddenly everyone is looking at their screens instead of through the fence, and there's a murmur, that particular crowd murmur that is the sound of many people processing the same information simultaneously and having slightly different reactions to it. A woman nearby said, "Oh my God," quietly, not dramatic, just, "Oh my God," the way you say it when something real has happened that you don't fully have room for yet. I looked at Elliot Marsh. He had known for 51 minutes. He stood in exactly the same position he'd been standing in at 8:54. Spine vertical, rifle at the precise angle, chin level, eyes on the middle distance. But I had been here long enough to see the difference. He wasn't counting anymore. He had never been counting. Not today. He was present, entirely, without effort, the way that only comes from duration and practice and the particular grace of having been made, over many cold, dark mornings, to feel everything before you're permitted to react to anything. The building had spoken at 8:54. He heard it. The rest of us got a notification at 9:45. I waited. An hour and 15. My coffee had been cold for 40 minutes, and I was past the point of pretending to drink it, and had consigned it to a small personal monument to stubbornness, holding it anyway, because my hands needed something. He came through the side door at 10:22 in his puffer jacket and jeans, and I was across the pavement before I'd fully decided to move. "Last day," I said. "I know," he said, the way Benny had said it. I handed him the second coffee. He took it with a slight widening of eyes that means someone is touched, but not going to perform it. "The announcement," I started. "I know. 8:54, I said. "That's when you felt it." He looked at me for a moment. 8:49, he said. 5 minutes earlier than I'd clocked it. 5 minutes I'd lost to double consciousness, to the half-second lag of processing what my gut had already known. I nodded. "How long?" I said, before it stopped feeling like sensing and started feeling like knowing. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. It was cold enough that I could see the warmth coming off the lid in a thin steam. "I'm not sure it ever stops feeling like sensing," he said. "I think the sensing just becomes so fast you can't catch the gap between sense and knowledge." He considered the cup. Like, you know when you hear a word and you know what it means, but you can't remember learning it? You just know it now. It's like that. The building taught you. I spent enough time at the fence. He looked at me. "So did you." "Not enough." "No, but you started." He said it with the simplicity of a man stating fact. Not consolation, not encouragement, just the honest inventory of where I'd gotten to. "You can feel the difference now." The weighted silence. "You know what it sounds like." "What it feels like," I said. "What it feels like," he agreed. We shook hands. He walked east on Victoria Street, shoulders slightly hunched against the December cold, coffee in hand, entirely ordinary, which is the most extraordinary thing about him. I want to say something honest before I finish. I went to Buckingham Palace 3 months ago to study institutional behavior from the outside, to observe and record and contextualize from a safe, scholarly distance. What happened instead is that the fence taught me something I didn't know I was there to learn, which is that presence, real presence, the kind that processes everything and acts on nothing, the kind that holds still while remaining completely alive to what's happening, is itself a form of knowledge. not a container for knowledge. The thing itself. Elliot Marsh learned to read a building by standing at it long enough and being present enough that his nervous system stopped treating the information as incoming and started treating it as continuous. The difference between those two things is the difference between hearing a foreign language and thinking in it. I spent 3 months at a fence. I didn't get a fluency, but on my last Tuesday at 8:49, 5 minutes after Elliot Marsh, because that's the honest number, I felt the building shift its weight. I felt the silence change quality. I felt the coming announcement before it came. Not psychic, not magic, just present, in a way that only becomes available when you stop waiting for something to happen and start letting what is already happening come through. The plane took off into a gray December sky, and I watched London shrink below me. The river, the parks, the particular density of the city that you can only see from above, the way it contains multitudes without appearing to. And I thought about a 23-year-old in a sentry box, standing still, reading silence, learning to tell the difference between the air before an announcement and all the other kinds of air, learning to hold the weight before anyone else has been told what the weight is. Some knowledge is not given. Some knowledge is grown, and it grows specifically in the gap between the official announcement and the moment the building first changed its breathing. That gap is where Elliot Marsh lives. That gap is where the knowing happens, and it's smaller than you think, and larger than you can count.